The blazing sunset painted the dusty main street of Ventura, California, in hues of amber and gold as Isabella Quinn dismounted her exhausted horse. Her shoulders slumped with the weight of a journey that had taken her from the refined salons of Boston to this coastal frontier town. The year was 1872, and the promise of a new beginning after her father's death had brought her west, though nothing could have prepared her for the hard realities that awaited her. Isabella tied her horse to the hitching post outside the telegram office, her gloved hands trembling slightly as she reached into her satchel for the letter that had been her only guidance. Her uncle's ranch, according to his correspondence, was supposed to be thriving, a place where she could start anew as his bookkeeper. But the telegram waiting for her inside would change everything. Miss Quinn. The clerk's sympathetic expression told her everything before he even handed her the yellow paper. "This came 3 days ago. Been waiting for you." Isabella's hazel eyes scanned the short message, her breath catching. "Uncle William, dead." The words barely escaped her lips before she felt her knees weaken. The influenza had taken him just 2 weeks before her arrival. "I'm mighty sorry, madam," the clerk said. "He was a good man. Left his small spread to you from what I understand, but—" The man hesitated. "But what?" Isabella pressed, removing her dusty hat to reveal auburn hair hastily pinned up after days of hard travel. "Well, madam, there's not much left. Drought hit hard last summer. Banks been looking to foreclose. Most of the hands left when they weren't getting paid. Just old Virgil and the foreman hanging on." Isabella clutched the counter edge. "And who is this foreman?" "That'd be Sutton," came a deep voice from the doorway. "Seth Sutton." Isabella turned to face the man who'd spoken. He stood silhouetted against the dying sunlight, tall and broad-shouldered, with a stance that suggested he was comfortable with the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. As he stepped inside, the light revealed a face weathered by sun and wind, a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, and eyes as cold and gray as winter storm clouds. "Miss Quinn, I presume," Seth said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair in need of a trim. He didn't offer a smile or any other courtesy as his gaze assessed her city clothes and clearly exhausted state. "Your uncle's been in the ground for 10 days. Place is falling apart. I stayed on to hand over the keys, but I'll be moving on come morning." Isabella felt a flash of indignation cut through her grief and exhaustion. "Mr. Sutton, I've just learned of my uncle's passing. A moment of respect would be appreciated." "Respect won't save your uncle's ranch," Seth replied flatly. "Neither will tears. You'd best sell what's left and book passage back east. This land will eat a city woman alive." Isabella straightened her spine, years of managing her father's household after her mother's death having forged a steel within her that wasn't immediately apparent. "I have no intention of returning east, Mr. Sutton. That ranch is all I have left in this world." Seth Sutton's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those stormy eyes. "Then you'd better learn quick that sentiment has no place in surviving out here. Your uncle was a good man, but too soft. That's why he's dead and the ranch is dying." Isabella flinched at the harsh assessment. "You seem remarkably cold-blooded, Mr. Sutton." "Cold keeps you alive out here, madam. Cold calculation, cold decisions, cold trigger finger when needed." He settled his hat back on his head. "My wagon's outside. I'll take you to the ranch. Tomorrow you're on your own." Isabella didn't immediately follow him. "I may not know ranching, Mr. Sutton, but I know people, and you strike me as a man who's forgotten what it means to care about anything." Seth paused at the door, not turning back. "You're right about one thing, Miss Quinn. You don't know ranching." Then he stepped outside, leaving her to follow or find her own way. The clerk gave her a sympathetic look. "Sutton's the best foreman in 3 counties, madam." Cold as ice, like you said, but he kept that ranch going longer than anyone else could have. Isabella gathered her meager belongings. He said my uncle was too soft. What did he mean? William Quinn had a heart bigger than all of California. Extended credit to folks who couldn't pay, hired men nobody else would, fought the railroad when they wanted to cut through his best grazing land. The clerk sighed. Times got hard, bank loans came due, and that heart of his finally gave out trying to save everyone but himself. Isabella nodded, squaring her shoulders. Thank you. She stepped outside to where Seth Sutton waited impatiently beside a wagon. The ride to her uncle's ranch was silent, the darkness gathering around them as Seth handled the reins with practiced ease. Isabella studied his profile in the deepening twilight, noting the tension in his jaw and the careful way his eyes continuously scanned the surroundings. "Were you with my uncle long?" she finally asked. 3 years, Seth replied without elaboration. "And before that?" A muscle twitched in his cheek. "Does it matter? I prefer to know something about the man delivering me to a remote ranch in the dark." Seth's eyes flicked briefly toward her. "Army, then bounty hunting, then your uncle hired me to protect his herd from rustlers." "That satisfy your curiosity, Miss Quinn." Isabella absorbed this. "You were a soldier during the war, Union cavalry, fought at Shiloh, Vicksburg, Atlanta." His words were clipped, each one seeming to cost him something to speak aloud. They crested a small rise, and in the moonlight, Isabella could make out the silhouette of a ranch house nestled against rolling hills. A small cluster of outbuildings stood nearby, and beyond them stretched what she assumed were grazing lands, though darkness obscured their extent. "Welcome to Willow Creek Ranch," Seth said without enthusiasm. "What's left of it?" As they drew closer, Isabella could see that the main house was in need of repair, with missing shingles and a sagging porch. A single lantern burned in what appeared to be the kitchen window. "Virgil's still up," Seth noted. "He's been cooking for the ranch since before your uncle bought it, ornery as hell but loyal." The wagon rolled to a stop before the house, and Seth jumped down without offering Isabella assistance. She clambered down on her own, her legs stiff from the journey. An elderly man emerged from the house, lantern held high. "So you made it," he said gruffly, his rheumy eyes taking in Isabella's travel-worn appearance. "Don't look much like a rancher to me." "I'm Isabella Quinn, Virgil. I understand you worked for my uncle." "Work for him still, as I see it," Virgil replied. "Dead don't mean gone in my book. Come on inside. Got stew that needs eating." Isabella followed Virgil into the house while Seth unloaded her trunk. The interior was simple but had once been comfortable. Now it bore the signs of neglect: dust on the mantel, cobwebs in corners, the lingering smell of illness despite attempts to air the place out. "Your uncle's room's been cleaned," Virgil said, setting the lantern on a scarred oak table. "You can take it or the small guest room. Up to you." "The guest room, please," Isabella said softly, unwilling to displace her uncle even in death. Seth entered with her trunk, setting it down heavily. "Kitchen stocked for about a week. Virgil stays in the bunkhouse but comes in to cook. There's maybe 20 head of cattle left in the north pasture. 2 horses besides yours, an old mare, and your uncle's gelding. Hen house has a dozen chickens. Well's running low but should last till the rains come if they come." The inventory of her inheritance was sobering. Isabella removed her gloves slowly, taking in the house that was now hers. And the debts. Banks owed about $800. Feed store another 100 or so. Doc Harmon treated your uncle without charging, but a contribution to the widow's fund would be proper. Isabella's stomach clenched. Nearly $1,000 in debt, and from what she could see, the assets wouldn't cover half that amount. "I see." Seth's expression remained impassive. "Like I said, Sell what you can and go back east. And if I choose to stay, Isabella challenged. Then you'd better be harder than your uncle was, Seth replied, willing to make the tough choices he couldn't. Isabella glanced at Virgil, who was ladling stew into bowls. What would those choices be, Mr. Sutton? Sell the North Parcel to the Prescott Mining Company. They've been after it for 2 years. Would clear your debts but lose you the water rights. Or sell the whole thing to James Blackwell. He's been buying up all the small ranches around here. Blackwell's a snake, Virgil interjected. Poisoned the Miller family's well when they wouldn't sell. Nothing proved, but everyone knows. Seth's jaw tightened. I didn't say I liked the options, just that they're what's available. Isabella sat at the table, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of her situation. There must be another way. There isn't, Seth said flatly. This land doesn't forgive weakness or sentiment. Isabella looked up at him, studying the hard lines of his face, the emotional distance he maintained even standing only feet away. Is that what happened to you, Mr. Sutton? This land froze your heart. For the first time, something like surprise flickered in Seth's eyes, quickly replaced by a cold mask. My heart's not your concern, Miss Quinn. Your ranch is. I think they might be related concerns, Isabella persisted, a strange boldness overcoming her exhaustion. You said my uncle was too soft, yet he inspired loyalty from men like Virgil, and you stayed even after his death. I owed him, Seth said tersely. Debts paid as of tomorrow. Sit and eat, Virgil ordered, breaking the tension. Both of you, arguments go better on full stomachs. Surprisingly, Seth obeyed, taking a seat across from Isabella. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional creak of the house settling. The land east of the creek, Isabella finally said. How many acres? Seth glanced up. About 80. Rocky, not much good for grazing. But the mining company wants it. There's copper, maybe silver, nothing proven yet but enough signs to interest them. Isabella nodded slowly. If I sold just that portion, not the water rights, just the land, how much could I get? Seth studied her with new interest. Maybe 500, not enough to clear all debts. But enough to buy time, Isabella countered. Time to make the rest of the ranch profitable. A short, humorless laugh escaped Seth. With what experience, what hands, what cattle? You're a city woman with soft hands and Eastern ideas. Isabella set down her spoon, anger flaring. My hands may be soft, Mr. Sutton, but my will is not. My father was a successful businessman who taught me accounting and negotiations. I ran his household after my mother died when I was 16. I've managed servants, planned budgets, and handled crises. I may not know ranching, but I know how to learn, and I know how to work. Book learning won't help when you're facing a drought or rustlers or a sick herd, Seth countered. No, Isabella agreed, but someone who knows those things could. Someone like you. Seth froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. I'm leaving tomorrow. For what? Another ranch, another employer who won't care if you live or die. You said yourself that my uncle was a good man. Help me honor his legacy. Stay on as foreman. Help me make this place work. Seth set down his spoon carefully. You can't afford me. I can't afford not to have you, Isabella replied. I'll pay you with a share of the profits once we're out of debt. There won't be profits for a long while, if ever. Then I'm offering you a challenge, Mr. Sutton. You strike me as a man who doesn't back down from those. Virgil chuckled softly. She's got your measure, Seth. Seth's eyes never left Isabella's face. You don't know what you're asking. This won't be like Boston. The work is brutal, the odds are against you, and I'm not a gentle teacher. I don't need gentle, Isabella said firmly. I need honest. I need someone who knows this land. And I need someone who, despite his apparent coldness, cared enough about my uncle to stay until I arrived. Something shifted in Seth's expression, not softening exactly, but a hairline crack in his rigid facade. 1 month. I'll give you 1 month. If you haven't run back east by then, we'll talk terms. Isabella extended her hand across the table. Agreed. Seth hesitated before taking her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but controlled, as if he was conscious of his strength. You'll regret this, Miss Quinn. Isabella, she corrected him. If we're to work together, you might as well use my name. Isabella, he repeated, the syllables awkward on his tongue as if unused to such familiarity. He released her hand quickly. Dawn comes early, be ready to work. With that, he rose from the table, nodded to Virgil, and strode out the door, leaving Isabella with the distinct feeling that she had just made either the wisest or the most foolish decision of her life. The first week at Willow Creek Ranch tested every ounce of Isabella's determination. True to his word, Seth roused her before dawn each day, expecting her to learn everything from mending fences to checking the dwindling herd for signs of disease. Her soft hands blistered, then calloused, her muscles screamed in protest, and her fair skin burned despite the wide-brimmed hat she wore. Throughout it all, Seth remained distant and critical, pointing out every mistake with cold efficiency. Yet Isabella noticed that he was always close enough to intervene when a task became dangerous, like when she nearly stepped on a rattlesnake while checking the chicken coop, and he calmly dispatched it with his revolver. You need to watch where you place your feet, he'd said afterward, his voice betraying no emotion despite the fact that she was still trembling. Rattlers like warm spots. They'll be under rocks near buildings. Listen for the warning. Isabella had nodded, swallowing hard. Thank you. Seth had merely shrugged. Can't have you dying on my watch. Bad for my reputation. By the end of that first week, Isabella had made her first significant decision. She would ride into Ventura to speak with the Prescott Mining Company representative about selling the eastern parcel without the water rights. I'll accompany you, Seth said when she announced her plan. Prescott's man is slippery. He'll try to cheat you. I can handle negotiations, Isabella insisted. Not these kinds, Seth countered. Out here, contracts are sometimes enforced with guns, not courts. Isabella wanted to argue further but recognized the wisdom in his words. She had already observed the barely concealed disdain some of the townspeople showed her during her brief visits to Ventura. A woman alone, trying to run a ranch, was an object of curiosity at best, contempt at worst. The morning they rode into town, Isabella wore her most businesslike dress, her hair pinned neatly beneath a modest hat. Seth rode beside her, silent as always, but his presence was a tangible force that seemed to clear their path as they made their way down Ventura's main street. The Prescott Mining Company had established an office in what had once been a saloon. A well-dressed man with oiled hair and a carnation in his lapel greeted them with practiced charm. Miss Quinn, a pleasure to finally meet you. Lawrence Prescott, Jr., at your service. He extended a manicured hand, which Isabella shook firmly. His eyes darted to Seth, standing like a shadow behind her. And Mr. Sutton, I'd heard you were moving on. You heard wrong, Seth replied flatly. Prescott's smile tightened. Well, won't you both have a seat? Drink? No. Down to business then. Isabella sat with perfect posture, her father's lessons in negotiation at the forefront of her mind. Mr. Prescott, I understand your company has expressed interest in the eastern section of Willow Creek Ranch. Indeed, though we'd prefer the entire property, Prescott said smoothly. The fragmenting of land parcels makes operations so inefficient. I'm only interested in discussing the eastern section, Isabella replied. 80 acres, excluding water rights to the creek. Prescott's smile never wavered. Your uncle was similarly selective, but circumstances have changed, have they not? I understand the ranch's financial situation is precarious. Isabella felt Seth shift behind her, a subtle warning in his movement. My circumstances are not your concern, Mr. Prescott. Your interest in the land is. I'm prepared to sell the eastern parcel for $800. Prescott laughed, a practiced sound. Miss Quinn, surely you jest. That land is rocky, difficult to access. 300 would be generous. The land contains copper deposits, possibly silver, Isabella countered. Worth considerably more than 300. Rumored deposits, Prescott corrected. Unproven, speculative. Yet your company has been pursuing this speculative land for 2 years, Isabella noted. 700. 400, Prescott countered, his smile slipping. 650, and I'll include a right-of-way for your equipment. Seth's hand touched her shoulder lightly, a signal they had agreed upon if she was pushing too hard. Prescott leaned back, studying her with new calculation in his eyes. You're not what I expected, Miss Quinn. 500 with the right-of-way and we have a deal. Isabella considered. It was less than she'd hoped but would cover the most pressing debts. I'll need the money in cash today, and a written contract specifying that water rights remain with Willow Creek Ranch in perpetuity. My dear lady, preparing contracts takes time. I brought one with me, Isabella interrupted, withdrawing papers from her reticule. Simple, straightforward. 2 copies. We sign, you pay, and we conclude our business. Prescott's expression hardened momentarily before he forced another smile. You are your uncle's niece, it seems. Very well. He scanned the contract, his lips thinning at certain clauses. This is rather specific about preserving downstream water quality. My uncle may have been generous, Mr. Prescott, but he wasn't naive about mining operations. Neither am I. After several tense minutes, Prescott signed both copies and counted out $500 from his safe. I hope this is the beginning of a productive relationship, Miss Quinn. When you're ready to discuss the remainder of the property, good day, Mr. Prescott, Isabella said firmly, rising with the money and her copy of the contract securely in hand. Outside, Seth helped her mount her horse, his expression unreadable. That was well done, he said simply. The unexpected praise warmed Isabella more than it should have. Thank you. Will 500 be enough to keep us going? Seth mounted his own horse. It'll pay off the feed store and make a good faith payment to the bank. Buy us some breathing room. He looked at her directly. But Prescott won't give up. Neither will Blackwell. They both want the whole ranch and they don't like losing. Then they'll have to get used to disappointment, Isabella replied with more confidence than she felt. As they rode back toward Willow Creek, Isabella became aware of 2 riders following them at a distance. Seth, she said quietly, behind us. Seth didn't turn his head. I see them. Keep riding, normal pace. Who are they? Trouble, Seth replied grimly. Could be Blackwell's men. Could be just opportunists who saw a woman with cash leave Prescott's office. Isabella's heart began to race. What do we do? When we reach the bend by the old oak, be ready to ride hard. I'll deal with them. I won't leave you. You'll do exactly as I say, Seth cut her off, his voice low and dangerous. The money gets to the ranch. That's what matters. Before Isabella could argue further, the sound of galloping hooves announced their pursuers had abandoned pretense. Go! Seth shouted, drawing his revolver and wheeling his horse around. Isabella dug her heels into her mount's flanks, bending low over its neck as she'd seen Seth do during their rides. The horse responded instantly, charging forward as gunshots cracked behind her. She fought the urge to look back, focusing instead on the path ahead, the money secured inside her bodice. She rode hard for nearly 10 minutes before slowing to listen. The sound of distant gunfire had ceased, replaced by an ominous silence. Torn between continuing to the ranch and returning to help Seth, Isabella hesitated, pulling her horse to a halt. The decision was made for her when Seth appeared around the bend, his horse at a canter. Relief flooded through her until she saw the dark stain spreading on his left sleeve. "You're hurt," she cried, urging her horse toward him. "It's nothing," Seth dismissed. "Bullet grazed me. The men won't follow one's wounded worse than I am and the others looking after him." "You recognize them," Seth's jaw tightened. "Blackwell's men, Henderson and Pike. They've done his dirty work before." "We need to report this to the sheriff," Isabella insisted. "Sheriff Mason is in Blackwell's pocket," Seth replied grimly. "This is how things work here, Isabella. Power makes its own law." They rode the rest of the way to the ranch in tense silence. Once there, Isabella insisted on treating Seth's wound despite his protests. In the kitchen, she carefully helped him remove his shirt, trying to maintain a professional demeanor as she faced his bare torso. His body was lean and muscled, scarred in places from what she assumed were past battles. The bullet had indeed only grazed his upper arm, but the wound was deep enough to require cleaning and bandaging. "You're good at this," Seth observed as she worked efficiently, applying carbolic solution to the injury. "My father was often ill in his later years," Isabella explained, focusing on the task rather than the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. "I learned to be useful." Seth winced slightly as she wrapped a clean bandage around his arm. "Your father was lucky to have you." Isabella secured the bandage and stepped back, suddenly aware of their proximity. "He would say he made his own luck, as will we." Seth reached for his shirt, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You should have kept riding today, not waited for me." "That's not how I operate, Mr. Sutton," Isabella replied softly. "I don't abandon people who risk themselves on my behalf." "Seth," he corrected, something shifting in his gaze. "If we're working together, you might as well use my name." Isabella smiled at having her own words returned to her. "Seth," she agreed. A month passed, then another. With the most pressing debts addressed, Isabella and Seth established a tentative partnership in running the ranch. She handled the books and negotiations with suppliers, gradually earning respect in town as a shrewd businesswoman. Seth focused on the practical aspects of ranching, teaching Isabella what he could while maintaining the property with Virgil's help. They hired 2 new hands brothers named Michael and Joseph Rays, who had worked briefly for Isabella's uncle years before. With their help, they began the slow process of rebuilding the herd, purchasing a small number of cattle at auction with the remaining funds. Throughout this time, the dynamic between Isabella and Seth evolved from rigid formality to something resembling mutual respect. She noticed small changes in him, moments when his customary coldness would slip, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the hard exterior. He began to occasionally join her for evening meals instead of eating alone in the bunkhouse. Once, she even surprised a laugh from him when she recounted her disastrous first attempt at making Virgil's special biscuits. "I've never seen anything quite that shade of black," Seth had remarked, the corners of his eyes crinkling with genuine amusement. "They were more like weapons than food," Isabella had agreed, delighted by this rare show of warmth. Yet for every step forward, there seemed to be a step back. Seth maintained an emotional distance that frustrated Isabella, especially as she became increasingly aware of her own growing feelings for him. Sometimes, she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher, only for his features to harden once more when she met his gaze. The situation came to a head one evening in late autumn. A sudden storm had swept in from the coast, catching Isabella as she returned from checking the chicken coop. Seth found her in the barn, soaked to the skin and shivering as she tried to towel off her hair. "You'll catch your death," he said, shrugging out of his coat and draping it around her shoulders. The gesture was practical, not tender, yet the warmth of the garment and the lingering scent of him leather, pine, and something uniquely Seth enveloped her. "Thank you," Isabella said, pulling the coat tighter around herself. "I didn't realize how quickly the storm would arrive." Seth stood before her, close enough that she could see droplets of rain clinging to his dark hair. "You should get inside, change into dry clothes." Instead of moving, Isabella found herself asking the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Why do you keep everyone at a distance, Seth? Even after all this time working together, I feel I barely know you." Seth's expression shuddered. "You know what you need to that I can run this ranch." "That's not what I meant," Isabella persisted. "You never speak of your past, your family, what you want from life. You keep everything locked away." "Some things are better left locked away," Seth replied tersely. "Are they? Or do they fester in the darkness?" Isabella reached out impulsively, touching his arm. "I've seen moments when you're different, when you laugh or when you're gentle with the new foal or teaching Michael's son to ride. Then it's like you remember yourself and pull back into this shell." Seth stepped away from her touch. "You're imagining things." "I'm not," Isabella insisted. "Seth, whatever happened to you in the war after it doesn't have to define you forever." His jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell me," Isabella challenged. "Help me understand why a man who clearly has the capacity for kindness chooses coldness instead." Seth's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "You want to know? Fine. I watched my entire unit die at Shiloh, boys I'd promised to bring home safely. After the war, I tried ranching in Texas with my brother until Comanche raiders killed him and his family while I was away in town. I hunted down those responsible and discovered I had a talent for violence. Became a bounty hunter, because it was the only thing I was good for. Tracked men through snow and desert and brought them back dead more often than alive." His voice was flat, emotionless, but his eyes burned. "Your uncle gave me a chance when most wouldn't touch me, said everyone deserved redemption. He was wrong. Some men are just broken, Isabella. Some things can't be fixed." Isabella absorbed his words, her heart aching for the pain behind them. "My father used to say that broken things are often stronger where they've been mended. The Japanese have an art form, kintsugi, where they repair broken pottery with gold. The cracks become part of the beauty." Seth gave a short, bitter laugh. "I'm not a pretty vase, Isabella. Some breaks go too deep." "I don't believe that," Isabella said softly. "I've seen the man beneath the breaks, Seth. He's worth knowing." Something vulnerable flickered across Seth's face before he mastered it. "This conversation is pointless. You should get inside." As he turned to leave, Isabella called after him. "You're too cold for love, Seth Sutton, too afraid to let anyone close." Seth paused in the doorway, rain streaming down beyond him. When he looked back, his expression was carefully controlled once more. "Then warm me if you dare, Isabella Quinn, but don't blame me when you get frostbite trying." With that, he disappeared into the storm, leaving Isabella clutching his coat around her shoulders, her heart pounding with the challenge in his words. The next morning brought clear skies and an unspoken tension between them. They worked side by side repairing a section of fence damaged in the storm, their conversation limited to the task at hand. Yet Isabella was conscious of a shift between them. The barriers Seth maintained seemed more deliberate now, as if he was fighting to reinforce walls that had begun to crumble. For her part, Isabella found herself watching him with new awareness, noting the competent strength in his hands, the occasional softening of his expression when he thought she wasn't looking. His coat hung on a peg by the kitchen door where she'd left it, and each time she passed it, she remembered the challenge in his words, "Warm me if you dare." 3 days later, word reached them that James Blackwell was hosting a harvest celebration at his ranch, an ostentatious display of wealth and power to which all local landowners were invited. "It's not really an invitation," Seth explained when the embossed card arrived. "It's a summons. Blackwell wants to see who's still standing, who's vulnerable." "Then we should decline," Isabella suggested. Seth shook his head. "That would be seen as weakness or defiance. Neither is wise with Blackwell. We go, we smile, we learn what we can about his plans." And so Isabella found herself preparing for her first social event since arriving in California. She unearthed her finest dress from her trunk, a deep burgundy silk with modest lace trim that had been fashionable in Boston the previous year. As she pinned up her hair, she realized how much she had changed since wearing it last. Her face was more tanned, her hands no longer soft and white, her bearing more confident despite the circumstances. When she descended the stairs, she found Seth waiting in the parlor, almost unrecognizable in a clean black suit and freshly trimmed hair. He turned as she entered, and for an unguarded moment, open admiration showed in his eyes before he controlled his expression. "You look appropriate for the occasion," he said stiffly. Isabella raised an eyebrow. "As do you. I hardly recognized you without dust and day-old stubble." A reluctant half-smile tugged at his mouth. "Virgil insisted, said I couldn't escort you looking like a trail-worn saddle tramp." The word escort sent an unexpected flutter through Isabella's stomach. "Well, you clean up remarkably well, Mr. Sutton." Seth offered his arm with formal correctness. "Our carriage awaits, Miss Quinn." The Blackwell estate was the largest in the county, a sprawling ranch house built in an ostentatious Spanish style with numerous outbuildings and manicured grounds. Lanterns illuminated the approach, where a stream of carriages delivered guests dressed in their finest. Isabella noted that despite the harvest theme, there was little genuine warmth in the proceedings. This was a display of power, not community. James Blackwell himself greeted them at the entrance, a corpulent man in his 50s with small, calculating eyes, and an expansive manner that struck Isabella as theatrical rather than genuine. "Miss Quinn." "What an extraordinary pleasure," Blackwell exclaimed, taking her hand and holding it longer than propriety dictated. "Your uncle was a dear friend. Such a tragedy, his passing." His gaze shifted to Seth and his smile cooled. "Sutton, still working as a hired hand, I see." "Foreman," Seth corrected flatly, his hand coming to rest lightly at the small of Isabella's back in a subtle gesture of support. "Ah, yes, foreman." Blackwell's smile never reached his eyes. "Well, do enjoy yourselves. The buffet is exceptional, the champagne imported." "Miss Quinn, I hope we might speak privately later. I have a business proposition that could solve all your challenges." "How thoughtful," Isabella replied with practiced politeness. "Though I'm pleased to say Willow Creek Ranch is doing quite well at present." Blackwell's smile tightened. "Is it? How fascinating. Well, my offer stands. Now, if you'll excuse me, other guests to greet." As they moved into the crowded main hall, Seth kept his hand at Isabella's back. "He's surprised we're still holding on," he murmured close to her ear. "That's good. Means he doesn't know exactly how we stand." "He's also unpleasant," Isabella replied quietly. "I disliked him immediately." "Trust that instinct," Seth advised. "Blackwell destroys whatever he can own." Throughout the evening, Isabella was introduced to various local notables, the mayor of Ventura, wealthy ranchers, a judge who looked at her with undisguised condescension. She maintained a poised demeanor, deflecting intrusive questions about her ranch's finances with practiced ease while gathering information about the local power structure. Seth remained close by, his usual taciturn nature serving them well as he observed the room. Occasionally, Isabella would catch him watching her with that unreadable expression, only to look away when their eyes met. After dinner, the furniture was cleared for dancing. A small orchestra played a waltz and couples began to take the floor. Isabella stood with Seth at the edge of the room, watching the swirling figures. "Would you care to dance, Miss Quinn?" came a smooth voice. Lawrence Prescott, Jr., appeared beside them, elegant in evening wear, hand extended in invitation. Before Isabella could respond, Seth surprised her by stepping forward. "Miss Quinn promised this dance to me, I'm afraid." Prescott's eyebrows rose. "Did she indeed? Well, perhaps the next one then." Without waiting for her response, Seth led Isabella onto the dance floor, his hand firm at her waist as they took position among the other couples. "I didn't know you danced," Isabella remarked as they began to move with the music. "There are many things you don't know about me," Seth replied, guiding her smoothly through the steps. "Cavalry officers were expected to manage a waltz. You manage it exceptionally well," Isabella noted, surprised by his grace. His hand was warm against her back, his movements assured without being possessive. "You seem surprised that I can be civilized," Seth observed, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Not surprised," Isabella corrected. "Just pleased to discover another facet of you." Something in her tone made his expression soften momentarily. "You're the talk of the room tonight," he said, changing the subject. "The Eastern woman who's defying expectations." "Am I defying them?" Isabella asked. "Or merely surviving?" "Both," Seth replied, his gaze holding hers as they turned. "Most thought you'd be gone within a week. Instead, you've paid down debts, hired hands, and started rebuilding the herd. You've earned respect." "We've done those things," Isabella corrected. "I couldn't have managed without you." Seth's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You underestimate yourself." They completed the dance in silence, the tension between them shifting into something electric and undefined. As the music ended, Seth released her properly, but Isabella felt the absence of his touch like a physical loss. "Miss Quinn," James Blackwell's voice intruded as he approached them. "Might I have the honor of the next dance?" Isabella glanced at Seth, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell," she replied with forced graciousness. Blackwell proved to be a mediocre dancer. His conversation focused entirely on himself and his achievements. As they circled the floor, he maneuvered them toward a quieter corner. "I'll be direct, Miss Quinn," he said, his jovial mask slipping. "Your ranch is an island in the middle of what should be my consolidated holdings. I'm prepared to offer you a generous sum enough to return east in comfort and establish yourself there." "I appreciate your directness, Mr. Blackwell," Isabella replied evenly. "Allow me to respond in kind. Willow Creek Ranch is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone." Blackwell's fingers tightened painfully on her hand. "Don't be foolish, my dear. One woman cannot stand against the tide of progress. Your uncle learned that lesson too late." "Are you suggesting my uncle's death was not natural, Mr. Blackwell?" Isabella asked, her voice steady despite the chill that ran through her. Blackwell's smile was cold. "I'm suggesting that stubbornness can be hazardous to one's health, especially when one relies on a man like Sutton with his checkered past." "My foreman's loyalty is beyond question," Isabella stated firmly. "Is it? Men like Sutton follow money, Miss Quinn, not sentiment. Everyone has a price." The dance ended and Blackwell stepped back, bowing with exaggerated courtesy. "Think about my offer. It expires at the month's end." Isabella rejoined Seth, her composure intact despite her racing heart. "I believe it's time we departed," she said quietly. Once in their carriage and away from the Blackwell estate, Isabella related the conversation to Seth, whose expression darkened with each word. "He threatened you," Seth said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Not directly," Isabella clarified. "He was too careful for that. He implied your uncle was murdered and suggested I could be bought." Seth's hands tightened on the reins. "Blackwell doesn't make idle threats, Isabella. He's escalating." Isabella sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the implications. "Do you think he's right about my uncle?" Seth's jaw worked as he considered. "Your uncle's heart was weak. The doctor confirmed that, but stress can kill as surely as poison. Blackwell's pressure on the small ranchers has been relentless. Banks calling in loans suddenly, water rights disputed, cattle disappearing. It takes a toll." "And what about his other suggestion?" Isabella asked carefully. "That everyone has a price." Seth turned to look at her directly, the moonlight illuminating the hard planes of his face. "Is that what you're worried about, that I might sell you out?" "No," Isabella answered honestly. "I trust you, Seth. I wonder sometimes why you stay. What keeps you at Willow Creek when you could find better paying work elsewhere?" For a long moment, Seth was silent, his gaze returning to the road ahead. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "At first it was obligation to your uncle, then it was the challenge you presented. Now—" He paused. "Now I stay because for the first time in years I feel like I'm building something rather than destroying it." The simple honesty of his answer touched Isabella deeply. "Thank you," she said softly. Seth nodded once, acknowledging her gratitude without further comment. The rest of the journey passed in companionable silence, the tension between them transformed into something deeper and more profound. When they reached the ranch, Seth helped Isabella down from the carriage, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. In the silver moonlight, his features seemed less severe, the barriers he maintained slightly lowered. "Blackwell will make his move soon," Seth said quietly. "We should be prepared." "What can we do?" Isabella asked. "I'll speak with the Ray's brothers tomorrow, set up additional patrols. We can't match Blackwell's men for numbers, but we can be vigilant." Seth hesitated, then added, "And you should consider carrying protection. I can teach you to use a small revolver." The thought was jarring to Isabella, a reminder of how far she'd come from her Boston life, yet she recognized the practicality of his suggestion. "All right, if you think it necessary." Seth nodded, his expression solemn. "I'll teach you tomorrow." He stepped back, formality returning to his posture. "Good night, Isabella." "Seth," she called as he turned to go. When he looked back, she added, "Thank you for the dance." Something like a smile touched his lips. "You're welcome." As promised, Seth began teaching Isabella to handle a small Colt revolver the next day. They stood behind the barn where he had set up targets on hay bales. Isabella listened intently as Seth explained the mechanics of loading, aiming, and firing. "Respect the weapon," he instructed, his voice serious. "It's not a toy and it's not for intimidation. If you draw it, be prepared to use it." Isabella nodded, trying to quell her nervousness as she accepted the revolver from him. It was heavier than she'd expected, the metal cold against her palm. "Both hands," Seth corrected, stepping behind her to adjust her grip. His chest was warm against her back, his arms encircling her as he positioned her hands properly. "Steady your right with your left. Sight along the barrel. Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger, don't pull it." Isabella was acutely aware of his proximity, the solid strength of him behind her, his breath stirring her hair. She focused on the target, trying to follow his instructions. Her first shot went wide, the recoil stronger than she'd anticipated. Seth remained patient, his guidance calm and matter-of-fact as she continued to practice. By the end of the hour, she was hitting the target consistently, though not always where she aimed. "That's enough for today," Seth said finally. "Your hands will be sore. We'll practice again tomorrow." Isabella nodded, carefully unloading the revolver as he taught her. "I never imagined I'd be learning to shoot," she admitted. "In Boston, such things weren't considered ladylike." Seth took the weapon from her, his fingers brushing hers. "Out here, survival matters more than ladylike behavior." "You're adapting well." "Am I?" Isabella looked up at him, searching his face. "Sometimes I feel like I'm play-acting at being a rancher that everyone can see I don't truly belong." "You belong," Seth said simply. "You've earned your place here, more than many who were born to it." His words warmed her. "Including you?" she asked quietly. Seth considered this. "I don't know that I belong anywhere, but I fit here better than most places." "You belong at Willow Creek," Isabella said with sudden conviction. She hesitated, then finished, "with the ranch." Something flickered in Seth's eyes, recognition of what she hadn't quite said. "Isabella," he began, but was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. They both turned to see Michael Reyes riding hard toward the house, his expression urgent. Seth immediately shifted into alertness, his hand moving instinctively to his holstered revolver. "What is it?" he called as Michael reined in. "Cattle," Michael reported breathlessly. "North pasture fence is cut, at least a dozen head missing. Tracks leading toward Blackwell land." Seth's face hardened. "When?" "Must have been last night. Joseph found the cut fence this morning, followed the tracks a ways." Seth turned to Isabella. "Stay here. I'll go with Michael to assess the damage." "I'm coming with you," Isabella countered firmly. "This is my ranch, my cattle." For a moment, Seth looked like he would argue, then nodded curtly. "Stay close to me. Bring the revolver." The north pasture was Willow Creek's most remote grazing land, bordering Blackwell's property along a disputed boundary line. When they arrived, Joseph Reyes was already attempting to repair the fence where it had been cleanly cut with wire cutters. Seth dismounted to examine the tracks. 4 riders, he determined, studying the ground. Professional job. They knew exactly which cattle to take, all prime breeding stock. Isabella surveyed the damage, anger building within her. "This is theft, plain and simple. We should inform the sheriff." Seth exchanged glances with the Reyes brothers. "Sheriff Mason will do nothing without proof. Tracks and cut fence won't be enough." "Then we'll get proof," Isabella decided. "Can you follow the tracks onto Blackwell's land?" Seth straightened, studying her with a new respect. "I can. But once we cross that boundary, we're trespassing. Blackwell would be within his rights to shoot us." "Not if we bring the sheriff with us," Isabella countered. "He may be in Blackwell's pocket, but he can't ignore a direct request to investigate stolen property, not without revealing his corruption publicly." Seth considered this, then nodded slowly. "It could work, or it could get us killed." "What's your alternative?" Isabella challenged. "Let Blackwell steal from us until there's nothing left." A muscle worked in Seth's jaw. "No, but I go alone first, scout the situation, confirm the cattle are there. Then we approach the sheriff with specific information." "Not alone," Isabella insisted. "It's too dangerous." "I've done more dangerous things before breakfast," Seth replied with grim humor. "This is my job, Isabella. Let me do it." Their eyes held, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Isabella nodded reluctantly. "Be careful. And if you're not back by sundown, I'm coming after you with or without the sheriff." Seth almost smiled. "I believe you would." He turned to the Reyes brothers. "Finish the fence repairs. Keep watch. No one rides alone until this is settled." With that, he mounted his horse and set off along the cattle tracks, a solitary figure against the vast landscape. Isabella watched him go, a knot of worry tightening in her chest. The hours of waiting were among the longest of Isabella's life. She tried to occupy herself with routine ranch tasks, but her thoughts remained with Seth, imagining all manner of dire scenarios. As the afternoon waned and the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, her anxiety grew. When the sound of hoofbeats finally approached, Isabella rushed from the house, relief flooding through her at the sight of Seth returning alone and apparently unharmed. However, as he drew closer, she could see the grim set of his features. "The cattle are there," he reported as he dismounted. "In a hidden corral behind Blackwell's South Range, brand already altered." "Then we go to the sheriff," Isabella said firmly. Seth shook his head. "There's more. Blackwell's planning something bigger. I overheard his foreman talking with some hired guns professionals, not ranch hands. They're moving tonight." Isabella's blood ran cold. "Moving on what? Us," Seth said simply. "Blackwell's tired of waiting. Tonight they burn us out, make it look like an accident. Classic tactic." "We need to evacuate," Isabella began, but Seth was already shaking his head. "No time. They'll be watching the roads. Besides," his eyes met hers, determination evident in their gray depths, "I'm done running from men like Blackwell." "What can we do? We're outnumbered." "We prepare," Seth replied, "and we turn their plan against them." What followed was a flurry of activity as Seth organized their defenses. The Ray's brothers were sent to secure the livestock in the stone barn, the structure least vulnerable to fire. Virgil, despite his age, proved invaluable in helping prepare buckets of water and wet blankets for fighting potential flames. Seth retrieved extra ammunition and weapons from a locked chest, distributing them strategically throughout the ranch house. "When they come," he instructed everyone, "they'll expect panic. They'll expect us to flee the flames toward the road where they'll be waiting. Instead, we hold position in the house and barn. Return fire only when you have a clear target. Make every shot count." As twilight deepened into night, the ranch fell into an eerie quiet. Isabella sat with Seth in the darkened parlor, both of them armed, watching the approach to the house through the windows. In the tense silence, Isabella found herself studying Seth's profile, struck by the calm resolve in his expression. "You've done this before," she observed quietly. Seth nodded without looking away from the window. "Similar situations, different circumstances. Are you afraid?" she asked. This made him turn to her, surprise evident in his features. "Yes," he admitted. "Not of the fighting, of failing. Of not protecting," he stopped, then finished simply, "of failing." Isabella reached across the space between them, her hand finding his in the darkness. "Whatever happens, Seth, I want you to know that meeting you has been transformative for me. You've shown me strength I didn't know I possessed." Seth's fingers tightened around hers. "You always had the strength, Isabella. You just needed the opportunity to discover it." He hesitated, then added quietly, "You've transformed me as well. Reminded me there are things worth fighting for beyond mere survival." The vulnerability in his voice touched her deeply. Seth, a flicker of movement outside, caught his attention. "They're here," he whispered, releasing her hand and shifting into a defensive position. Isabella peered into the darkness, making out shadowy figures moving toward the outlying buildings. A moment later, the night erupted in chaos as a blazing torch arced through the air, landing on the roof of the tool shed. More followed in quick succession, flames blooming like deadly flowers in the darkness. "Hold position," Seth murmured as Isabella tensed beside him. "They're trying to flush us out." The crackling of flames grew louder as the fire spread to the empty bunkhouse. Isabella could make out at least 6 men now, moving with military precision as they encircled the property. The sound of gunshots rang out from the direction of the barn, Joseph Ray's engaging the attackers. "There," Seth said suddenly, raising his rifle as a figure broke from cover, running toward the house with what appeared to be a bundle of dynamite. Seth's shot was precise, striking the man in the shoulder. The wounded attacker dropped the explosive, which landed harmlessly in the dirt. The failed attack seemed to enrage the other men, who began firing directly at the house. Bullets splintered the window frame inches from Isabella's head. She ducked instinctively, but maintained her grip on her revolver. "Back door," Seth ordered. "Two men trying to approach under cover of smoke. Can you handle it?" Isabella nodded, moving swiftly through the darkened house to the kitchen. Through the window, she could make out figures creeping toward the porch. Taking a steadying breath, she remembered Seth's instructions: aim, exhale, squeeze. Her first shot went wide, but it was enough to make the men dive for cover. Her second struck one of them in the leg, eliciting a howl of pain. The injured man's companion dragged him back into the shadows, away from the house. The firefight continued for what seemed like hours, but was likely only 20 minutes. The attackers, finding themselves met with unexpected resistance, gradually retreated. Eventually, only the crackling of flames and the occasional groan of collapsing timbers from the burning-out buildings broke the night's silence. "They're pulling back," Seth confirmed after a careful reconnaissance from an upstairs window. "Regrouping, most likely. We need to put out these fires before they spread to the main house or barn." Working together with the Ray's brothers and Virgil, they fought the flames with wet blankets and buckets of water. By dawn, the worst of the fire had been extinguished, though the bunkhouse and tool shed were beyond saving. Miraculously, no one on their side had been seriously injured. Michael had suffered a graze to his thigh, and Virgil had minor burns on his hands, but nothing life-threatening. As the sun rose, revealing the charred remains of the outbuildings and bullet-pocked walls of the ranch house, Isabella surveyed the damage with a mixture of grief and determination. "They'll be back," she said to Seth, who stood beside her, his face streaked with soot, his eyes weary but alert. "Yes," he agreed, "but not today. They lost at least 2 men injured, maybe 1 dead. Blackwell will need to regroup." "Then we use this time," Isabella decided. "We take our evidence to the sheriff, and if he won't act, we go above him to the federal marshal in Los Angeles if necessary." "This ends now." Seth studied her face, a new respect in his eyes. "You're not considering selling, even after this?" Isabella straightened her shoulders. "Especially after this. I won't be driven from my home by threats and violence. That's not who I am." She met his gaze directly. "That's not who we are." Something shifted in Seth's expression, a softening, a surrender of sorts. "No," he agreed quietly. "It's not." In the aftermath of the attack, the balance of power in Ventura County began to shift. When Sheriff Mason attempted to dismiss Isabella's accusations against Blackwell, she produced evidence that couldn't be ignored: the altered brands on her cattle, witnesses to the night attack, and most damning of all, one of Blackwell's wounded men who, facing a federal prison sentence, turned state's evidence against his employer. The investigation that followed revealed the extent of Blackwell's corruption: bribes to local officials, intimidation of smaller ranchers, and even complicity in the death of 2 homesteaders whose land he'd coveted. Though the legal proceedings would drag on for months, Blackwell's power was effectively broken. Throughout this tumultuous period, Seth remained by Isabella's side, his steady presence and tactical knowledge proving invaluable. Yet as the immediate danger receded, Isabella sensed him withdrawing once more, as if uncertain of his place in a world not defined by crisis. Winter settled over Ventura County, bringing with it much-needed rain for the parched landscape. Willow Creek Ranch began to recover from the attack. The bunkhouse was rebuilt, the herd slowly expanded, and a tentative prosperity returned. Isabella found herself contemplating the future with cautious optimism, except for one persistent worry: Seth's increasing remoteness. The matter came to a head on a chilly December evening. Isabella had been reviewing the ranch accounts in the parlor when Seth entered to make his nightly report on the livestock. As he turned to leave after delivering the information in his typically efficient manner, Isabella called him back. "Seth, wait. Please sit with me a moment." He hesitated, then complied, taking the chair opposite hers with a careful distance between them. "Is something wrong with the accounts?" "No," Isabella set aside her ledger. "The accounts are fine. It's you I'm concerned about." Seth's expression remained neutral. "I'm fine. Are you?" Isabella challenged gently. "Since the attack, since Blackwell's arrest, you've been distant, as if you're already gone in your mind." A muscle worked in Seth's jaw. "The immediate danger has passed. You don't need a gunman anymore." "Is that all you think you are to me? A hired gun?" Isabella asked, genuine hurt in her voice. Seth met her gaze directly. "What else would I be, Isabella? You've succeeded here. The ranch is turning a profit. You have respect in the community. My skills are less relevant with each passing day." "Your skills were never what?" Isabella stopped, gathering her thoughts. "Seth, do you want to leave?" The directness of the question seemed to catch him off guard. "One has nothing to do with it. It's the natural order of things." "That's not an answer," Isabella persisted. "Do you want to leave Willow Creek? To leave?" She hesitated, then finished softly, "To leave me." Seth stood abruptly, moving to the fireplace where he stared into the flames. "What I want doesn't matter. It never has." Isabella rose as well, approaching him slowly. "It matters to me." For a long moment, Seth remained silent, the firelight casting his features in sharp relief. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "I want things I have no right to want, Isabella." "Why would you have no right?" she asked, stepping closer. Seth turned to face her, the careful mask he maintained finally cracking to reveal the conflict beneath. "Look at you," he said with a gesture that encompassed all of her. "Education, refinement, a future. And look at me, a broken-down gunman with blood on his hands and ghosts that wake him in the night. What could I possibly offer you except tarnish on your brightness?" The raw vulnerability in his words moved Isabella deeply. "You really don't see it, do you?" she asked softly. "How much you've given me already: courage, strength. A home that's truly mine because you helped me fight for it." "That's gratitude speaking," Seth countered. "It's not the same as." He stopped himself. "As what?" Isabella pressed, now standing directly before him. "As love." "Is that what you were going to say?" Seth's eyes darkened. "Isabella, don't." "Why not?" "Because you're too cold for love, too damaged, too afraid." Isabella's voice was gentle despite the challenge in her words. "I remember what you said that night in the barn, Seth. Warm me if you dare." "I've been trying ever since, but you keep rebuilding those walls." Something like pain crossed Seth's features. "The walls protect you as much as me." "I don't want protection," Isabella replied, reaching up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. "I want you. All of you, the darkness and the light. The man who taught me to shoot and the man who danced with me at Blackwell's. The gunman and the rancher. The cold and the warmth." Seth stood perfectly still under her touch, his breathing shallow. "I don't know how to be what you deserve," he admitted roughly. "I'm not asking you to be anything other than who you are," Isabella said, her heart in her words. "The question is simpler than that. Do you love me, Seth Sutton?" For a moment he closed his eyes as if gathering strength. When he opened them again, they held a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "Yes," he said simply. "God help me. I have since the day you stood in that telegram office and refused to be defeated by bad news. I tried not to. Tried to remain professional, detached, failed miserably. Joy bloomed in Isabella's chest. Then stop fighting it, she whispered, her hand still cradling his face. Stop fighting us. Seth's resolve visibly crumbled. With a sound that was half surrender, half desperation, he pulled her into his arms, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that expressed everything words could not: longing, passion, the release of months of restraint. Isabella responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed herself closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Seth rested his forehead against hers. "I still think you're making a mistake," he murmured, though his arms remained firmly around her. Isabella laughed softly. "Then it's my mistake to make, and I choose you, Seth Sutton. Cold edges, warm heart, and everything in between." Seth's arms tightened around her. "I don't deserve you," he said against her hair, "but I'll spend a lifetime trying to." "That sounds remarkably like a proposal, Mr. Sutton," Isabella teased, drawing back to see his face. Something like wonder crossed Seth's features. "I suppose it does," he agreed slowly. Then, with newfound determination, he took her hands in his. "Isabella Quinn, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? I can't offer wealth or an easy life, but I swear to you my complete devotion, my protection, and a heart that, thanks to you, remembers how to love." Tears of happiness welled in Isabella's eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "With all my heart, yes." Seth's smile, the first full, unguarded smile she'd ever seen from him, transformed his face. He kissed her again, more tenderly this time, a promise sealed between them. Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers across the hills of Ventura County. Willow Creek Ranch bloomed with new life calves in the pastures, repairs completed on all buildings, and a sense of security that had been hard-won. On a perfect April day, with the Pacific breeze carrying the scent of orange blossoms, Isabella Quinn became Isabella Sutton in a simple ceremony attended by their small circle of loyal friends. The bride wore a cream silk dress ordered from San Francisco, her auburn hair adorned with tiny white flowers. The groom, to everyone's amusement, wore a new suit and looked distinctly uncomfortable until the moment Isabella appeared on Virgil's arm. Then, as witnesses would later recount, the transformation in Seth Sutton's face was something to behold, the habitual guardedness replaced by naked adoration. Their vows were brief but heartfelt, Seth's voice steady as he pledged himself to Isabella, her eyes shining as she returned those promises. Judge Thompson, who had replaced the corrupt officials of Blackwell's regime, pronounced them husband and wife with evident pleasure. The celebration afterward was modest by Eastern standards, but abundant in Western hospitality, tables laden with food, music from local musicians, and dancing that continued well into the evening. Seth surprised everyone by being an attentive host, though Isabella noticed he never strayed far from her side, as if unable to believe his good fortune. As twilight descended, the newlyweds slipped away from the festivities to share a private moment on the porch of what was now their home. Seth wrapped his arm around Isabella's waist, drawing her close as they gazed out at the land they had defended together. "Happy?" he asked softly. Isabella leaned into his embrace. "Completely." "And you?" Seth turned her to face him, his expression open in a way it rarely was with others. "I never imagined this kind of happiness could exist for someone like me," he admitted. "You've given me more than a wife, Isabella. You've given me redemption." "We've given each other a future," Isabella corrected, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "One we'll build together." Over the years that followed, Willow Creek Ranch flourished under their joint stewardship. Isabella's head for business and Seth's practical ranching knowledge proved a formidable combination. They expanded their holdings, invested in better breeding stock, and established a reputation for fair dealing that attracted loyal hands and favorable contracts. Their first child, a son they named William after Isabella's uncle, arrived a year after their marriage, a strong boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later, and another son, James, 2 years after that. Seth proved to be a devoted father, his natural protectiveness finding perfect expression in his care for his children. Though he never entirely lost the vigilance that years of dangerous living had instilled, he softened visibly in their presence, telling stories of his cavalry days without the darkness that had once accompanied such memories. Isabella watched this transformation with quiet joy, particularly on evenings when she would find Seth in the nursery, reading to the children or teaching young William how to whittle with a pocket knife. The man who had once declared himself too cold for love had become its embodiment, still capable of fierceness when required, but equally capable of tenderness. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Seth surprised Isabella with a gift, a small gold locket containing miniature portraits of their children. As he fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering against her skin, he spoke words that brought tears to her eyes. "You asked me once if I wanted to leave," he reminded her. "I can't imagine now what life would be if I had. You took a broken man and made him whole, Isabella. You dared to warm me when others saw only coldness." Isabella turned in his arms, touching his face with the same tenderness she had shown that pivotal night a decade earlier. "And you let me in, despite your fears. That was the true courage." Seth smiled, a full, unrestrained expression that had become increasingly common over the years. "I love you, Isabella Sutton, more today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "And I love you," Isabella replied, rising to meet his kiss. "Cold edges, warm heart, and everything in between, exactly as you are." As twilight settled over Willow Creek Ranch, their silhouettes merged into one against the backdrop of the land they had fought for, and the home they had created, two people who had found in each other not just love, but redemption, purpose, and the warmth that comes from daring to trust when trust seems impossible. In later years, their story would become something of a legend in Ventura County, the Eastern Lady, and the hardened gunman who built one of the region's most successful ranches. But for Seth and Isabella, the true miracle was simpler and more profound. They had found in each other exactly what they needed, at precisely the moment they needed it most, and neither ever again doubted the transformative power of a love brave enough to thaw even the coldest heart.